Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Step right up for another wonderful episode of The Genre Guys. Yes, that is right. We are here to entertain, to thrill, and to inspire and amaze. We have fantastic theme park donuts, candy corn, cotton candy, all sorts of wonderful things, even roller coasters that go off the tracks due to bombs. Hey, guys, how you doing?
Good.
You okay after that?
I'm okay. That took a bit of effort, but
yeah,
we are.
I'm imagining you in a top hat and a mustache, and as the ringmaster of our festivities here with all that circusy stuff.
I'm glad that's what I was going for. I'm glad you didn't say somebody who was hyped up on various illicit substances or the like. But anyway, how are you both doing today? Welcome back to Another Genre, guys.
We're good, and so's the movie, I think.
Yeah, well, we are talking about Rollercoaster, a film which involves multiple roller coasters in the plural, and those roller coasters going off of their tracks with people on them in horrific incidents, acts of terror or sabotage or whatever you'd like to call it. But at any rate, it's a gripping, suspenseful thrill ride of a film. How was that? Did you see what I did there?
Fair, yes.
Okay.
you put a Universal in PR when they made this movie back in the day.
I know. 1977, I believe it was the year it was made. Yeah. So, well, as people might be able to tell, obviously this film is about roller coasters, kind of, sort of, maybe, but there's a lot more to that. And I am going to leave it up to, let's see, who wants to take a stab at doing the summary? Lou. Okay, we'll give it to Lou.
I'm getting the flying fickle finger of fate here. First of all, this is a movie that had a very interesting origin. The story was floating around anyway, but it was largely made because Universal had come up with a gimmick. Now, movie gimmicks in the history of the movies are not rare. 3D was a gimmick. We even had smell-o-vision at one time. The whole idea being, how can we fight people staying home and watching television and get them to come out to the movies? Well, Universal decided for a movie they were making called Earthquake that they would try and develop this system called Sensurround, which was a series of huge, very low frequency speakers, which would simulate the physical vibrations of being in an earthquake. You didn't really hear it, you felt it on your face, and it bounced off the walls. And an outfit called Cerwin Vega, that was a famous sound and speaker company, came up with a way to make this work. And so at great expense, Universal installed these systems in what finally amounted to over 1,000 theaters back then, and made this movie, which frankly, Earthquake is a very mediocre disaster movie with some really hammy, corny stuff. But yes, they had this warning outside the theater, somewhat similar to all those warnings you do see on roller coasters now about if you have a heart condition or whatever. But to give you an idea, this thing literally vibrated the air around you. And I remember going to see Earthquake, the very first one, at the Grauman's Chinese Theater, the real thing, not the Disney copy. And if you've ever been there, there's a picture of it. They literally, see that? They hung like a big cargo net over the ceiling so that if, God forbid, some of these Chinese ornamentations that hang from that ceiling fell off, it wouldn't kill somebody underneath it. But then what do? You've spent all this money on all these theaters. Well, what else can we put vibrations in? Well, the next thing they did was the Battle of Midway, and the vibrations were simulating the bombs and the rumble of the engines of the planes taking off from the carriers, and that worked. And funny enough, that was also Chuck Heston. So then, what about roller coasters? And so Rollercoaster was born, and it's a story with George Segal as this wonderfully cynical, I would call him, but smart, basically OSHA inspector. He's the guy who looks at all of the amusement parks and checks them for safety all over Southern California. So when there is this explosion that they don't really even know it's for sure an explosion, but a crash where the train, as Table said, goes off the tracks and people are killed and everybody's scandalized, he's the guy who starts thinking maybe this isn't an accident. And sure enough, it turns out that Timothy Bottoms is a disgruntled or well, let's just call him what he is. He's nuts. And he has figured out the better mousetrap because, as he explains later, the amusement park business is so PR reliant and trust reliant because of all these rides that to make them cough up what he wants, which is $1 million, which shows you it was 1977. Nowadays it would be 100. In return for him, well, in return for them stopping these problems. And nobody believes that that's what's happening. And then another accident happens somewhere else and another one somewhere else. And his boss, Henry Fonda, says, you inspected that coaster, didn't you? Go out there and tell me what's going on. And he said, yeah, we just inspected it a month or so ago. And the clues start to add up. And he finds out that the owners of this park and of several others where some of these incidents are happening are all getting together for a meeting in Chicago, and convinces his boss to send him. And he basically crashes the meeting and says, guys, you've got a bigger problem than you realize, and you need to call in the feds. Well, they do. And Richard Widmark is the FBI chief in charge of the investigation. And he thinks George Segal is a smart ass, and he thinks these people are all amateurs, and he's got a wonderful arrogance problem.
Oh, yeah.
But the problem is that the bomber, Timothy Bottoms, has bugged the room where they're having this meeting. And he likes George Segal because he thinks you were the smart guy in the room telling him the right thing to do. And he involves him in the whole getting the money plot, which is what the rest of the movie is basically all about. And meanwhile, Segal has a daughter and an ex-wife. And he's also one of the little things in this movie that many of you who are young will not remember, but was a huge thing back in those days, are these stop smoking clinics where you go in a room full of full ashtrays and smells of cigarette smokes, and they wire you up. And every time you take a puff, they give you an electric shock as kind of an aversion therapy thing. And Segal is trying to quit smoking through the whole movie. And it's one critic said, in a way, it's a Hitchcock movie without Hitchcock because of the way the suspense builds and the way the characters are created. And it's just one hell of a ride. And I'm not really punning that much. It just is. And if you've never seen it, we're here to tell you, I think you should. How's that for a general summary of what happens?
No, that was great. That was an excellent summary. It was interesting to note that I believe it was Calder, who's on the screen right there. His daughter is actually played by Helen Hunt.
In her very first movie.
Yeah.
And there's other people. There's a scene where a guy from a theme park is coming into the office with some blueprints so they can try and figure out where the bomb is. And that is an uncredited Steve Guttenberg in his first movie. And there's several other faces you will recognize during watching this film of some great character actors and great, small parts, because again, it takes place in 3, 4, or 5 different amusement parks around the country. And the big finale is at Magic Mountain in LA, and which had at that time the world's biggest and I think first in North America looping coaster. Yeah. And this is where the big finale is going to take place. And well, it does. Anyhow, so if you like theme parks, if you like just the fun of the atmosphere, they really capture it. And one thing I really, really, really love about this movie is the music. And it's done by Lalo Schifrin, who we all know from Mission Impossible's theme song and Mannix and things like that. But he does everything from Kiddie Ride, Calliope, Tinkle Tinkle, happy music to symphonic stuff, because the bomber has a penchant for string quartets that he's listening to on his headphones while he's walking around, and adventure music and jazz music. Oh, and if you remember, what the heck is the name of that band at the end? Was it Cure or? Anyway, there's a rock band at the end, and there's a guy named Charlie Tuna, who was a big rock DJ in LA. And so there's a mix of styles of music in this movie that very few composers could probably pull off so well, and he certainly did. Plus, you will see in the credits, he did musical sound effects that were blended into this Sensurround to add tension to it. And frankly, during the movie, you don't even notice they're there. But when you watch it at home, where you don't have these massive Sensurround speakers in your living room, frankly, the effect is not as great for the Sensurround. But because of that, you can hear these musical glissandos and tones that Lalo composed with those frequencies in mind.
So the rock group in the movie were called the Sparks.
That's right, Sparks. And the guy who was the piano player was kind of iconic. I hate that word, but he was this tall, skinny guy who kept a dirty look on his face like he was angry all the time and had a mustache once sported by a famous World War II German leader. That'll make Jonas laugh. Anyway, for reasons you won't know if you haven't watched the new Lou show, but there they are. And here's this guy. And, you know, in the classic tradition of old time rock and roll, they break up the piano bench and throw their guitars around and, you know, do all of that stuff. But they're all there as part of the opening ceremonies for the looper for the American Revolution, I think it was called, the looping coaster. And anyway, I'm rattling on too long as usual. Shame on me. What do you think, guys?
Well, you know what? I'm not that big of a fan of this movie. I'm gonna come right out there and say it. Yeah, I appreciate what it was trying to do, and you know, watching it certainly took me vicariously to sort of theme park land, and I like those scenes and all that. But on the whole, I just found it a little, I don't know. It didn't really grab me as much as I was expecting it to do, and I think there were a few things. Like, especially near the end, it felt as though there were just a few too many kind of cheap fake outs. Like, for example, when those, right before the image I showed of the Sparks band, when they're smashing something up, there was a big explosion, which was kind of meant to make you feel as if a bomb had gone off.
But it was just pyro for the band.
It was just pyro for the band. And then, you know, there was like a guy who almost fell off the tracks when he was trying to reach the bomb while they were trying to disarm one. And yeah, you know, it didn't sort of grab me that much, unfortunately. I don't know, maybe.
Well, you know, I think it has holes. There's no doubt about that. And there's lots of little things like that. You know, the funny thing watching it now is I thought the storytelling was pretty tight, except for the roller coaster sequences. And the reason is, without the real Sensurround experience, they feel extended and padded to a point where they almost get you kind of slowed down rather than made more excited, I think, especially the ones at King's Dominion when he's being led all around the park to deliver the money to the bag.
Well, I was watching, yeah, you know, and that actually makes it a lot more sense given the context of Sensurround. I was watching those scenes where Segal was in the roller coaster, and I kept thinking to myself, like, gosh, how many times did they have this poor actor going on these roller coasters?
Well, I read somewhere that the extras on the Revolution stuff at the last park, and see, there you go. There's no cameraman. There's just a camera or two cameras there, and he's got to turn it on and turn it off at the right point. But I read that just the extras on the other scenes were going like 27 times in a row.
Wow.
And I've heard stories like that from extras I knew in L.A., who would go out and ride, say, the new Indy ride at Disneyland for the commercials that they were making before it opened. So they were thrilled to get the gig because they got to be the first ones to ride the ride, but they weren't so thrilled by the end of the day because that's a long day's work just going up and down all day long.
Well, it does a number on you. Well, Lorn, what did you think?
I think what I would say is that the movie really starts off with a bang, but you know, I thought the structure was a little wooden, and it's got a lot of ups and downs, and then it just sort of comes to a sudden stop.
Uh-huh. I heard what you said.
Yeah.
You know, when you said that about it starts off with a bang, I remember a guy named Bert Preletsky, who was a movie critic for LA Magazine years ago, and one of the greatest movie reviews I've ever read, and it was of the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And it was a one-sentence review where normally he would write 2 or 3 pages. And it said, this movie starts off with a bang but winds up chitty.
Seriously, I think I'm somewhere in between the two of you. I really enjoyed the movie, but I think I enjoyed it mostly because of the era it's in. I was born in 1977. And so I'm just old enough to remember this kind of era. I was really young in the mid 80s, but a lot of that stuff from the 70s was still kind of hanging on into that decade. So in that way, it sort of transported me back to my childhood and the way things felt at that time with the music, the styles, and all of that. And so for me, that was kind of like being transported back to my childhood. I thought the acting, particularly from Segal, was really good. I enjoyed watching him in this movie. But I did feel like the movie kind of fell apart in the third act. And that has mostly to do with some of the cheats that are involved with trying to foil the criminal and how that ultimately ends up. It felt to me like they didn't necessarily know a good way to end it, and so they just ended it. But that's for the time that I felt that I had while watching it. I feel like that's almost a mean complaint. The movie gave me a good time for 2 hours. I don't want to make too big a deal out of the third act drops. So,
well, I think the whole key to this movie, despite the suspense and the story, is Segal and Widmark and the great fun they have playing off of each other, because Segal is this wise ass cynic guy, but he gives a damn. And Widmark is this superior jerk, but he gives a damn, if not for anything else than to cover his own butt on this deal, and is always complaining about everybody else missing what he saw and what he said they should do. And they're just fun to watch going at each other. And then the brief scenes with Henry Fonda are good that way too. By the way, when you see the scene with Henry Fonda and he's in a big red bunk hat in a restaurant and is called on the phone about all this, that's Chasen's. Chasen's, the famous celebrity restaurant in Beverly Hills, or actually on the border of Beverly Hills. And that table he's sitting at, that was Jimmy Stewart's table. Anytime I ever went there, Jimmy Stewart was in that table and it was held for him. So that's kind of a little bit of history. Now that whole building was transformed into a Whole Foods, but they kept two of the red leather banquettes in one corner of the food court area of the market, where when you get your stuff at the deli counter and want to eat, you can still be at Chasen's. But anyway, there's a little nostalgia, history, whatever, of that era.
I've always got room for stories about a table.
And about food. Yes, about the table. Exactly right. Because Chasen's originally was a diner, and Dave Chasen, the owner, was famous for his chili. And it got to be such a favorite thing. You'd go in that restaurant. The menu was very high end. It was, cordon bleu cuisine, but they always had the chili. And in fact, famously, when we talked about Liz and Dick, when we were talking about also George Segal in Virginia Woolf, supposedly Elizabeth Taylor had the Chasen's chili shipped to her in Rome when they were shooting Cleopatra. That's how much she liked it. So
no kidding.
6 degrees of chili separation in George Segal, I guess we could call this movie. But
one thing I wanted to mention too was, and this might just be because we've recently done the movie 2010, but I found that the villain, Timothy Bottoms, was really sounding a lot like HAL 9000. Was that just me?
No, I think he was trying to be that dispassionate. And obviously the character thinks of himself as smarter than anybody else. But when Segal starts throwing a monkey wrench into his plans, he does not like it. And his cool melts. And suddenly the superior jerk becomes not so superior after all. And I think that's fun for the audience to watch too, to show how you can throw a monkey wrench into somebody's plans by basically holding them in a little bit of contempt, as Segal does. Mm-hmm. So I think that's valuable too. Now, the guy that on the special features on the disc, as you might have seen, the guy that wrote the original story had a long story to tell, and some of his stuff was, I don't know, so-so. But he mentioned that he got this idea from returning Vietnam veterans who were being dissed by society, and that maybe this guy was a demolition guy in the service, and that's why he knew how to make all these clever devices. And he wanted them to give that backstory to give him more dimension. To my mind, as a storyteller, it's better that you have no idea. He is just as you never even get a name for him in the show.
That's true. And they don't.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you're right. They don't go into how he knows how to do this sort of thing. They don't give us really any sort of backstory. It's just this psychopath who is blowing up amusement rides in order to get money.
And
I guess
he's
that's all you
very
really need.
calculating. And in fact, the professional bomb squad and radio guys that are working for the FBI and the cops are not as good as he is in most of the movie. The other guy in the cast mentioned there that we haven't mentioned, aside from Susan Strasberg, who was the daughter of Lee Strasberg, the famous founder of the Actors Studio, is Harry Guardino. And if you don't know who that is, go Google and look at the picture and you'll know, because this man worked on every TV show and every movie. He was the ultimate guy you get to play the cop. And whereas Richard Widmark is the FBI, Guardino is the local LAPD or LA sheriffs, we don't really know, cop who deals with Harry all the time. And at the beginning when they're at the first park, which we shot at Santa Cruz, I believe.
That's hilarious, because I was like, I've seen that guy before.
Oh, man, have you? This guy worked all the time. I didn't pull up his IMDb, but I bet you he's got over 100, 150 credits in movies and TV shows. And because he had that look, he could play a New York cop, an LA cop, and anybody cop. You know, he was kind of the lieutenant under Lieutenant Columbo in all these movies that involve cops. He was the guy answering Kojak's questions. He was the guy dealing with the M Squad or whatever it was. And he's a joy to watch always.
Had the right voice for it, too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And here.
And the other thing about this movie, I think, to note is how interestingly I can look at it. And for example, when he goes to this meeting in the hotel in Chicago, they shot the outside of the hotel with Second Unit in Chicago. But that scene where Calder is in the lobby, and that's not the Hyatt in Chicago. That's the Sheraton Industry Hills in LA. I know that hotel. And so they did a great job of making a movie that takes place all over the country on a budget, other than the budget, obviously, for the stars, who are considerable. In fact, it would be interesting to know, Widmark had a series called Madigan, where he was a cop. I wonder if Guardino ever played anything on that. It would have been interesting.
Something that's interesting about this is around this time, there were a whole series of disaster movies. It kind of became the thing where you had all of these large casts filled with these older stars. A lot of times their star was sort of fading, but they would come in for these big projects. And they were always these big epic disaster movies, which eventually led to the parodies of those. That's where Airplane came from.
Right.
And so you wouldn't have that whole genre of comedy, I don't think, from I think it was the Xanax, wasn't it?
It was Zucker is the word.
Zucker.
Yeah,
right.
they said they had a place called Kentucky Fried Theater that was a comedy improv theater, and they did Airplane. And there's a book that they recently put out of all their memoirs of making that is very worth reading if you're interested in that sort of thing. But these movies between the Universal ones, which were Airplane and all of its, in fact, I bought, when I was looking up this, I saw an ad, I said, oh, I got to get that. It's all four, and I'd forgotten there were four airport movies, and they call it the Terminal Pack because, of course, people die in all of them. But there was that, and there was Universal with Earthquake and this, and it's interesting. The one last Sensurround movie after this was a feature version of Battlestar Galactica that went nowhere. And when it was over. But how Sherwin Vega made money, movies may not have wanted these big speakers anymore, but you know who did? And this is also that era, discotheques. They sold hundreds and hundreds of sets of Sensurround-sized giant horn low-frequency speakers to discos. So there's that. But then the other great disaster guy was Irwin Allen, who did the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno. And of course, he got his start doing all these sci-fi shows on TV like Lost in Space and Land of the Giants. And, disaster movies were not a disaster at the box office. They actually lasted a lot longer than they probably should have. They had to keep coming up with new things. Like with the airport movies, they had to add the Concorde to one of them. Or I'm trying to think Jaws, of course, became a series like that too.
I was going to say the legacy of these movies lives on, especially with roller coasters. I don't know if
especially in this case, because horror movies now are all about let's kill a bunch of teenagers. And where do teenagers go for fun and frolic but amusement parks? So
these days these days they just stay at home and play, PlayStation.
Well, but at least at theme parks, they have an excuse for the fact that the lights are always off. How many times when you watch these teenage horror movies and they walk into a house and the murderer's there somewhere, they're scared, they know he's around. Do they turn on the lights? Yeah. Why would they do that? There you go.
There's some teenagers right there.
I'll take the 70s ones anyway.
Yeah. Well, one thing about this movie that really kind of that struck me, and like Lorn too, this was there was a lot of nostalgia here. Looking at the film and just sort of seeing, it really did a good job of showing what life was like back in.
You know what isn't in this movie that jumps out at you?
What's that?
Nobody's got a cell phone because there weren't any.
That's true.
They're all talking on radios and they're all having to run to a phone booth to answer it. And I'm going, oh, that was an ancient and primitive world, wasn't it? Anyway, go on about the era.
Well, I was just going to say that they do a good job of, I feel, portraying what life was like back in America at that time. And one thing that I'm starting to notice in a lot of these films that we're watching, which are, made in that era or a bit older and whatnot, is that Rollercoaster was a very diverse film. There were quite a lot, like it wasn't just a whole bunch of white people in there. Like you had, I was pleasantly surprised by that, given how the general sort of feeling seems to be that history was a bit of a whitewash. But it just goes to show you that before the current year, we had quite a lot of diversity in film already before this.
And nobody was telling us what evil, awful supremacists we were in those days, because it wasn't true.
It's it's sort of a bit like sort of discovering lost history. But again, now that I've spoken with you guys, now that I've gotten a bit more context about the Sensurround, maybe my opinion of the movie is easing up a little bit, because you were right. Part of the reason why I was a little thrown off with the film was the roller coasters. Like there are a number of scenes where it's just the first person perspective of the roller coaster going through its loop or going through its track, and you're kind of thinking like, okay, all right, that's kind of neat, I guess. All right, why are they doing this? But now with that context, it does. I feel a bit more forgiving.
Well, but you know what else makes that work is how deadly, seriously scary that opening attack is.
Oh, yeah.
Because unless you realize the potential for murder and mayhem, you wouldn't be patient sitting there watching George and everybody else ride those other coasters over and over again. Because it's that anything can happen, and we've already seen what happens when it goes wrong.
It's something that we talked about in the back channels when we were first discussing the movie, is something that I think might get lost in our conversation here, which is that this guy is setting explosives to get the coasters to go off track, but it's not a giant explosion. It's not a big boom. People don't realize that they're being sabotaged until the killer pretty much invites all of these executives to this meeting, because it's just a little pop that basically causes the rail to go up, and then they're off to the races.
And then they realize that he obviously has great understanding of engineering, because where he places that bomb is all about what phase of the travel the roller coaster car is in, how much momentum, which way it's going to go when it goes off the track to cause the most damage and the most fright. A method to his madness, as the saying goes.
No, it's true. And you're right, because more often than not, the bombs themselves are tiny. They are within what could be like a walkie, they are
size
of
a couple of packs of cigarettes, let's say.
Yeah, exactly.
They fit in your hand.
So when you see it, you feel as if, okay, well, is this that much of a threat? But the strategic placement of it and whatnot makes a lot of sense. But a few things that still kind of left me scratching my head. One of them was George Segal's, well, I guess his ex-wife and the daughter. I really didn't understand the point of them being there at the park by the end of the film. Like they decide to go to the park, which is being targeted by the bomber, and you expect that they will.
But they don't know, and the public doesn't know. So
no one knows.
But
and you expect that they will be on the roller coaster, and that somehow the bomber will cotton on to the fact that these two individuals are particularly close to George Segal. and they'll be involved somehow. But instead, George Segal is kind of running through the crowd, and he sees his wife and daughter. He's like, "Oh, what are you guys doing here?" It's like, "Oh, we came here to, because you said you were going to come here and we thought it was going to be fun." It's like, "Well, you should leave. It's not safe." Then they leave. And you're like, "Okay, what?"
And that's, by the way, that's his girlfriend and his daughter.
Sorry, girlfriend.
The ex-wife is a whole kettle of fish also. And
so there were just things like that. I was
sitting around meetings where they try and put these things together. There's often a lot of people, well, how can we broaden it out? How can we make him more human? How can we round out the characters? And sometimes it's like, they'd all be better off if they were more like Bottom's characters, that we don't know their past, we don't know their future, we just know what they are as pieces on the chessboard of this movie. But you had to get a girl in it, right? So
This is one of the third act things that I was talking about.
Yeah,
I feel like that particular thing to me feels like something happened in the editing of the movie. It feels to me like that was supposed to be a larger plot point that instead, probably due to time, that they sort of cut out some additional scenes that maybe we haven't seen.
Well, I wonder, rather than cutting out, whether they said, well, if we can get the daughter there, he'll have more jeopardy. So I don't know how we're going to get them involved in the finale, but at least start shooting them being there, and we'll see where in other words, I don't think they were finished when they were finished. Yeah. I think at the end they said, we're out of time, we're out of money, this is the best idea we've got to end the damn movie, let's just do it. And that's what happens.
And that's how the movie ends. Sorry, Lord.
The other complaint I have about the third act, and this is the one that really bothered me, is that, like you guys were saying, the interplay between Harry Calder and the bomber, and for that matter, the FBI guy, is great because they're all sort of antagonistic to each other, and you have this guy who's sabotaging the rides, who is a bit of a narcissist. He thinks he's smarter than everybody else, and he's enjoying playing with all these people. And there's a point where Harry is trying to figure out, well, what is it? What's your game here? What do you want? And he says, you don't get it. He says, there isn't anything. I just want the money, And when he said that, because of how dispassionate he is, I believed him. But when you get to the third act, his demeanor changes. When his plot is foiled, I believe if he had been remaining in character, the smart thing to do would have been put the detonator in his pocket and just walk out of the park.
Walk away. Yeah.
But now he's become somehow obsessed, and he can't not set off the bomb.
Yeah.
And to me, that felt like that's not the character I've been watching throughout the whole movie. And I felt like maybe it would have been unsatisfying for the audience if he did just melt into the crowd and they never apprehended him. They had to contrive what I felt was a dumb way to have the villain get his comeuppance. But he went from being what I thought was a very smart character to suddenly being completely emotionally driven, and I just didn't buy that part.
Well, I have to say, following on that, where I feel it went off the rails, pun intended, was the fact that in the final scene, again, they discover his bomb, and the entire time I was thinking to myself, okay, no, there's no way that they just discovered the bomb. Like, surely that's a fake. Surely there's another one. Surely there's a backup plan or whatnot. And there isn't. He's walking around. He's not even paying attention to the track where his bomb is. And it's only through a slight sort of random chance of luck where someone asked him to take a photo of their family with the roller coaster in the background that he suddenly realized that it had been disarmed. And so there were a lot of instances where, like you said, Lorn, it felt like the character acted very inconsistently, I suppose, would be the best way to say it.
Well, I suppose, but I think the answer is somebody who's trying so hard to be dispassionate and isn't really, who's getting more than money, he's getting his rocks off on fooling everybody and proving he's the superior intellect. He starts getting really pissed off at Harry, and rightly so, because Harry, at the same time, takes him very seriously and shows contempt for him. And that's when it's not a game for him anymore, it's personal. So I can buy that. I can buy that transition in his character. What I don't buy, I tell you the truth, the biggest plot flaw to me, he uses the same frequency for every bomb so that after they learn how to jam the first one, they can jam the second one. Right. That part to me was like, well, what are we going to do to stop it from going off? And
I had another problem with that, but I could be wrong in a technical sense. My understanding of how you jam a frequency is you typically flood it. And so my fear is that if you're trying to flood that frequency so that his doesn't get through, you're going to set off the bomb yourself.
Could be, yeah. And I will tell you something else. The people in minor parts, and God bless them, they got an acting gig. That guy playing the supposed expert in all the radio stuff, he's switching every switch to try. I didn't buy him for a second, man. That was overacting 101. And you should at least have the FBI experts seem as competent as the bad guy, and you never got that feeling really from any of them. You did from Widmark, but that was basically, and there's the problem, you see, when he's calling his own guys a bunch of jerks, you're discounting the forces that are out to get the smart guy. So, there's a plot problem there. Oh, we should have mentioned, I was reminded looking at that poster, two of the people involved in writing this, which is Richard Levinson and William Link, who, among other things, they're Columbo. They created Columbo.
Oh.
And so when you think of this as kind of a cross between a Hitchcock and a Columbo episode, you kind of see where it's coming from.
That is interesting. I was not aware. No, I mean, overall, it's a good film. It's just, as I said, it wasn't one that really particularly grabbed me. And it's sort of what part, the parts that had grabbed me sort of let go gently during the third act, but I still enjoyed it. I was still nice to watch. It was still a fun one.
There he is with his finger on the trigger. But guys, I love you both. I respect you both. And unlike you, I got nothing else to do, more or less. But you've told me on some of these movies how, well, I watched the first half hour and then I'm going to watch it next night and next night. I understand that's the compulsion of your real life, and more power to you. But this movie is not made to be seen in pieces, not even with pee breaks back in the old days. And so when you have to get back into it every time you come back to it, it's working against its ability to grab you. Like I said, I thought the lulls that I could really see, because when you watch as a director what Mr. Goldstone, the director, is doing, this is a remarkably sparse, tight choice of shots and choice of editing, and the way that like there's one where one of the accidents, we never really see it. We just see a long shot through clouds of smoke, supposedly coming from a fire, with a fire engine going through a theme park. And we're told but it sold it. And he sells it so well and so tightly that, like I say, when you get to these extended roller coaster scenes without that special effect punch, God, it's like somebody turned off the juice. Somebody killed the energy of the movie, to me, and it really stands out. And I don't remember back to when I first saw it with Sensurround if I ever felt that way, but I don't remember feeling that way. And I have to think that he maybe didn't plan it that way because that's not his style. And somebody at the front office said, no, damn it, you got to add another 3 minutes to the roller coaster because we got these boxes we paid umpteen zillion dollars for. We got to use them. Got to give people their money's worth.
I'm going to refute your point about the momentum just a little bit, if I can. The night,
game on.
The night that I watched this movie, I was trying really hard to get it watched quickly because I thought we were going to be recording the next day. And at about the halfway mark of the movie, I ended up getting a message from Pro saying he needed me right now to record for something that was important that night.
Right.
And so I ended up having to stop it. I had thrown my dinner in the oven. I had just pulled it out, and I had to leave it on the stovetop to go and record. And then after we got done recording, we ended up visiting for another hour and a half, and by that time it was bedtime. So I had to stop the movie for that night. But it was all I could think about before I went to sleep. And the very first thing I did the next day before I went into work was I watched as much of the movie as I could before I left. And it was on my mind the whole day until I got home, and then finally finished it that night. So it was not
great. That shows that it was, compelling is, I guess, the word. And that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that the performances, I really think the strength of the movie is in the actor's portrayal of their character.
Oh, yeah.
Segal is great. Bottoms is great. One of the things we talked about, Lou, was, and I think other people have mentioned in reviews that I've seen, is that one of the most effective ways that Bottoms comes off as really creepy is that he encounters other people in the park. You know, he's strolling around slowly with this kind of a creepy grin on his face, and he's eating
he's a big cotton candy fan. Yes.
Yeah. And
he's a weirdo.
He's very strange. And inevitably he comes across people and they try and talk to him. And he says nothing. He just gives them this.
Yes.
And you really
just
get
smiles.
this.
Or he says something like, I might come back. I like your cotton candy.
It's unsettling. It's one of those things where it's like you just feel like, I wish I hadn't encountered this person. And so that's the mark of a good actor. When you can make somebody feel that way just through these little mannerisms, it does a great job of selling the character. The only real complaint I have about the movie is really the third act, and even then, it's the tail end of the third act. And I feel really bad making a negative comment about that, because the movie itself, it sold me through the whole thing right up until that point. Yeah. So the only other complaint, if I had to muster one, is you have the home life of the characters. Of Harry, he's obviously split from his wife. He goes to pick up his daughter. His wife now has a new boyfriend. He has a new girlfriend. You get some sense of what their personal lives are day to day, particularly when he takes his daughter out to get a hamster. Her birthday.
I was captivated by the hamster.
Yeah, but they don't really do much more with it than that. And I think maybe a little bit more of that also could have helped.
Well, and you know what I think part of that is? All the people involved in this, although Jennings Lang was a big producer at Universal and did lots of features, but I mentioned the writers and a lot of the other actors, they're TV people. If this was the pilot episode of Harry Calder, Industrial Investigator, all of that background stuff about his life would need to be there, because next week we can't make 50 minutes of bombs. We got to have some other stuff going on and some other characters who are regulars for you to want to tune in and watch and give a damn about. So I think that's partly the neither fish nor fowl nature of this story coming back to haunt them to some degree. And I would agree with you.
Well, it was a lot of really good points. It's a movie that I think members of the audience, you guys should check out. You should take a look for yourself. Make sure when you're watching it, you should try to do it with as large of a screen and as big of a Sensurround package as possible, because you won't regret it.
Yeah, I meant to ask you, Lorn, you were talking about which should I watch it on and how. There's a message at the beginning of the video that tells you what they've done to try to simulate Sensurround as far as how the tracks are presented and recorded. It didn't come off for me at all, but I don't know whether that works if you know what you're doing. I'm not as conversant in that tech as you are.
Yeah, so I want to give some background for the audience so that they understand. What we were talking about is that I do have a surround sound system at home that's not bad. It's not the best system in the world, but I like it. Right. But what I also have is I do some computer gaming and some VR gaming, particularly some flight sim stuff. And so what I have for my home setup, actually on this chair right here, I have a butt kicker installed in the chair. So the way that works is it's kind of like a subwoofer, except what it's got is an audio transducer with a shaker on it. And so you bolt this thing to the central column of your chair, and when it picks up those low bass frequencies, it shakes this thing so that you feel vibration in the chair. And that plays into games that have these real low frequency sounds. It's especially good when you have things like cannons, because when you pull the trigger to fire a shot, it literally shakes your seat, and it feels like you're actually really firing something.
I bet it shakes your sheet too, if I pronounce that differently.
And so what we were trying to settle on is like, well, should I watch this on my TV in the room with a surround sound system, or should I watch it on my little computer screen but get the audio effect? And ultimately, I think we decided that I'd listen to it on the surround sound system. And ultimately, I didn't really feel like the audio was that great for this movie. And
Yeah,
so,
I didn't either. And we should mention, to show you the great sacrifices that we go to for you. Unlike almost every other movie we've done in this series, for whatever reason, although I remember it being so 6 months ago, this one's not on the pay-per-view or rental list for anybody. You got to buy the disc.
Yep.
So, maybe the question we should ask, is it worth spending $20 for the Blu-ray disc? See, my problem is always, as far as watching on the TV or on the computer, my computer's CD deck is not Blu-ray. So if I've got a movie in Blu-ray and I put it on in here, it won't play. I have to watch it on the TV. So
it was incredibly analog. You had this sort of shiny disc thing, and then you had to open up a machine and get off the couch and put it in there. Oh, it was rough. I mean, who does
those were
that?
the days. You know what you sound like? Do you remember the Jetsons?
Yes.
When his wife asked him, "How was your day, dear?" She says, "Oh, it's terrible. I had to push 3 whole buttons today," because that's what he did. It. Spacely Sprockets was push buttons.
It's rough. I tell you. Well,
but back when we were a boy in the 70s without cell phones, it was tougher, believe me. Although I bet you the traffic was easier to go out to Magic Mountain, that's for sure.
That is likely the case. Anyway, on that note, I think
we've done our what we like and what we don't like in the course of the show, unlike our usual summary. So how are we going to wind this up?
Yeah, I think so. So any last thoughts, guys?
Well, I think if you're a fan of the era, especially, this is a movie worth watching. If you like these light kind of thrillers and you're a fan of the actors that are in it, it's worth a watch. It's fun. On the other hand, if you don't care about the era, if you're not a fan of theme parks, if you don't like thrillers and serial killers and all of that stuff, and
in other words, if you're a degenerate, sick human being,
then maybe give it a pass. But I felt that it was worth the time invested. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that.
It was a lot of fun. And before this conversation goes completely off the rails, I think we will, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to us once again. We very much appreciate that. We love the support that you've been giving us. Please leave us your comments down below. Did you watch the movie? Are you going to watch the movie? Are you going to order it off of Amazon and actually use the disc? If you have seen the movie, what did you think? Did you think we had the right takes on it? Did you have your own views? Let us know down below. We always love reading your comments. And we will see you next time on the Genre Guys.
That we will. Either here, first run, live as they happen almost, although recorded on you as members on the Pro channel, or 3 months later, reappearing for quote-unquote free on the new channel on T3PO, as we call it. So a double chance to enjoy great movies and I hope great conversation. Thank you for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of The Genre Guys here on T3PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it. And if you want to enjoy every episode of The Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing film? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WDW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.